The reason I think the Democratic Party and President Biden is losing black votes is they only care about black people every 4 years. They come into our neighborhoods and say, we're gonna make stuff better. We're gonna do this, do this, do this. And then finally us black people are like, man, other than my ability to dunk a basketball, all my neighborhoods are still the same. Our schools are still the same.
Charles Barkley actually drew some pretty fierce backlash recently for saying that he would punch black Trump supporters in the face if he sees them wearing Trump merch that features the former president's mugshot. But to his credit, during a recent panel on CNN, he also had some, I believe, accurate critique for the Democratic Party. Now, I think that the discussion that happened during this panel is an important one, and it's particularly important because you have 3 different individuals participating, and they're providing different theories for why why Trump and the Republican Party has actually managed to increase its support among some black voters. So you heard what Charles Barkley had to say there, but before we get to the other individuals involved in this panel, including Van Jones and Coleman Hughes, I wanted to give you some of the poll results to show you how the black electorate has kind of moved a little toward Trump. So for instance, in 2016, Trump received the support of 8% of black voters, according to exit polls. That support increased to 12% in 2020. The USA Today Suffolk poll from January found that Trump's support among black voters has stayed the same at 12%. Now that was a poll from January, as I just mentioned, but the more recent poll that came out by the New York Times and Siena College shows that the black voter support for Trump is actually up from 4% in October of 2020 to 23% in February of this year. So look, I gotta be honest, Cenk, the New York Times polling seems to be a little more extreme in its results, right? It seems to be the most negative for Biden, and it stands out in that way. But there have been subsequent polls that have shown and confirmed that Biden is losing support among people of color, black voters, Latino voters. So Biden is in a little bit of trouble with these demographics, and it's important to understand why.
Yeah. We might have millions of people watching this show, but you can be the difference maker because we just need 1% of our audience to be paid members, and then this show can be around forever. So you can make that difference. Click join now. First of all, I didn't see it as an outlier. The poll before that had Trump's numbers with black people at 21%, very similar number. I've seen now every poll has Trump going up and Biden going down with black voters, particularly young black voters.
Young males, yes.
Yeah. And so why is that happening? First of all, Charles Barkley is 100% right. And this is why when Barkley was signed to do this show on CNN, I said he's going to be the best host on CNN. You know why? He's honest, and that's what he's known for. He's courageous in what he says, and he's rich. Wait, why does being rich matter? Because you're not gonna intimidate him. Oh, well, you're gonna lose this job at CNN, and then you're not gonna have money and status anymore. That's what scares a lot of the reporters to being like, what do you need me to say? Of course, well, of course, whatever's not true, I will say in favor of corporate politicians. Now, they don't say it like that, but it's implicit, right? But with Barkley, good luck trying that. Nothing can shut up Charles Barkley, which is what I love about him. So is it true that the Democrats say a lot of sweet things to black voters to try to get them on their side? Yes. Is it true that they never deliver? Pretty much yes. Is it true that the Republicans are worse? Yes. But so if you're bragging that you're zero and the other side is negatives, I don't think that's the brag that you think it is.
So some black voters, though, believe that Republicans aren't necessarily worse than Democrats. And so it's all about perception. And this next statement comes from Coleman Hughes. I like Coleman Hughes. People like to just automatically call him a conservative. I don't think he's conservative. I think that he's nuanced in the way he thinks about things. He said in the context of this panel discussion that it bothers him that Trump lies. He didn't vote for Trump. He never would vote for Trump. But he also helps to explain what the appeal of Trump is for some young male black voters. And he explains what it is in this next clip. Let's watch.
It's black men under 30 that are moving towards the Republican Party, black men basically my age. And it could just be a general dissatisfaction with the message that the Democratic Party is telling black people. They're telling black people essentially, nothing is your fault, it's all systemic racism, and that's actually not appealing to a lot of younger men. Younger men prefer to be told your life is in your own control, and you can make your own destiny.
So I think what he says there is really interesting, and it's something that I've been thinking about a lot over several months, because when you look at the message, the dominant message toward marginalized communities from the Democratic Party, it's not really an empowering message. It's not an inspiring message. It's kind of disempowering.
Yeah, so I think there's one point that they missed, but first let me address what he said. I think that's true. I gotta be honest, I hate victimology. And so, but here's where you need nuance, so please buckle up. So if you're a Republican who say, oh, well, I don't like this victim talk, so that's because, and racism never existed or sexism never existed, you're nuts. Or that racism and sexism are totally gone and they don't exist anymore. You're nuts, that's not true at all, right? On the other hand, if you say that's why black people can never make it, or even imply that, right? It's not your fault, you shouldn't even, like they don't say you shouldn't try, no one actually says that. But it's so heavily implied, like there's nothing you can do, the white man's gonna keep you down because of racism, etc. Now, if you're one of these libs in Washington and you say, oh, you're not allowed to say that about minorities. I am a minority. So don't tell me, oh, Muslims in this country are greatly discriminated against. If you told my kids, you'll never make it because the white man will never, the Christians will never allow the Muslims to rise up, get the hell out of my house. No, my kids can do anything they want. And yes, they could do it in this country, right? So I'm not interested in your victimology. I am interested in the truth and the fact that racism still exists and that it was just horrible in this country. But you could believe both things at the same time, that it exists, but the way to fight it isn't to constantly talk about how you're a victim, but to empower yourself and to say, oh yeah, watch me. I'll do it 10 times better, right? But the one thing that they're all missing out of an otherwise brilliant conversation, and how often do you hear me saying that about a conversation on CNN or anywhere on cable news? So thank you for doing this program, is crime. And so they never mention crime, and I think crime is driving black voters to go, well, the Democrats in the cities aren't helping me, so maybe I should vote Republican.
Yeah, and there's been a bit of a backlash in more liberal cities. I want to say across the country, but it's not really across the country. It's mostly on the West Coast, right? It just happened in San Francisco. It had happened in Oregon.
No, it's happening in DC too.
That's true. DC just passed some, the DC Council has passed some legislation related to public safety. And so you're right about that. It's happening in DC. It's not happening in Los Angeles yet, unfortunately. But what you do notice in these cities is the people who suffer the most from the crime are majority minority communities, right? And so I think that probably is part of it too, but you're right, they didn't discuss that in the context of this discussion. But just going back to Coleman Hughes and what he said real quick. So if I take a step back and look at the broader picture, I think what's lacking in the Democratic Party is a message of hope, something inspiring, because they've been so hyper-focused on negative campaigning, fear-mongering about Donald Trump, and that's all fine. I think there's a place for negative campaigning. I'm not saying that they shouldn't do any of that, but they have forgotten to give American voters hope, something inspiring, something to look forward to. And by the way, put race out of it, that's how I feel. That's how I currently feel.
Oh, of course. And there's a reason why the Democrats never deliver. It's because their donors pay them not to deliver. So they said they were going to do, so they mentioned in this panel discussion, and everybody involved was brilliant. Van Jones, that's another guy I defend all the time. I get a lot of heat for defending him.
We have more clips that he's
we're
included.
going to show you in a second. He's smart, open-minded, cares to actually get at the right answers. So anyways, why do the Democrats never deliver? Because of their donors. So they said not only on voting rights, which they discussed, but then all the things that are economic issues. They said higher wages through higher minimum wage, pushing up wages, lower drug prices, et cetera. And they never, ever, ever deliver because they take so much money from the drug companies and the restaurant association, et cetera. So betraying the voters, including minority voters, is part of the game for Democrats.
So let's go to Van Jones because he touches on that, and I think it's important to hear him out. Let's watch.
There were things that black voters wanted and expected and hoped for in 2020. Police reform, the George Floyd Policing Act, but it didn't pass. Voting rights, the John Lewis Voting Rights Bill, that didn't pass. More progress on criminal justice, the Equal Act, that didn't pass. And so once you get past the emotionality and this, that, and the other, you just kind of look to Charles' point, what did we get for our vote? Look, the economy is better than it could have been. I love a lot of stuff he did, but if you just look at that particular set of issues, you could be disappointed.
So he was a lot more specific in what the promises were, promises made, but promises that were not kept.
Yeah, and by the way, those things are actually don't involve much donors at all. So those were layups. So why didn't they pass those? Well, that's because the donors didn't want the filibuster taken out, because if the filibuster was taken out, then they have no excuse not to pass paid family leave, lower drug prices, et cetera, et cetera. So they needed the filibuster to cover the ass of their donors, and the black people were collateral damage in that political calculation.
Right, so the filibuster would require the Senate to have 60 votes instead of a simple majority to pass legislation.
Yeah.
And they wanted to keep that intact because it makes it incredibly difficult to pass any, let's say, regulation pertaining to how corporations are behaving and all of that stuff. So.
Yeah, and I said black people were the victims there. That's definitely true. But Van Jones made another good point where he said, look, this isn't really about black folks getting disillusioned with the Democratic Party as much as it is poor folks getting disillusioned. And so because you see it in the demos, it's not all black people, it's younger black people, some with less money, et cetera. And he said the white guy in Appalachia was also screwed over.
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
And so now, and he didn't say it's just about the Democratic Party. He mentioned the Republican Party screwing over white people in Appalachia and their base as well, right? And that is true. And guys, I know that mainstream media, with this is an exception. This is a wonderful segment by CNN, and always be honest and give credit where it's due, right? But overall, mainstream media has convinced you that everything has to be binary. If you say that the Democrats are bad, that must mean that you love Republicans. That doesn't make any logical sense at all. No, the Republicans are worse on every one of these issues. They voted against civil rights in every way. They don't want police reform, they voted it down. They don't want those voting rights. They hate the voting rights more than anything else because they think it cost them elections. They've voted against everything that would help the average American. But the Democrats are playing a game with you guys, and they're not in favor of it either. So it's good cop, bad cop. They're largely on the same corporate team, because that's the corporate team that's funding both of their campaigns.
Yeah, Republicans will just, for the most part, it's not true of every case, but they'll just tell you who they are, Whereas Democrats will tell you there's something completely different and then carry out the same votes, the same behavior. For the most part, there are obviously some differences, and I don't want to generalize and say, no, they're completely the same. They're not completely the same. But when you make these big promises, and you don't fulfill those promises. And by the way, it's one thing if they fight like hell and they don't succeed. People will see that. But when they don't even fight for the policies that what happened to the public option?
Didn't even propose it.
Didn't even propose it. That was something that Biden ran on.
He's a liar.
There are political ramifications to that. And I think now we're seeing the chickens come home to roost. And this is constructive criticism toward the Democratic Party. Instead of having like this knee-jerk negative reaction to it and just dismissing it, they could actually listen to the voters. I think it would actually help them win elections.
And just in case you don't know how all the mechanics went down, they said, well, guys, this is so unfair because there's nothing we can do about the filibuster. But when it came to raising the debt ceiling, which would have affected the stock market of the beloved wealthy folks and corporations, all of a sudden there was something they could do about the filibuster, and they lifted it immediately.
Right.
So apparently the filibuster could be lifted anytime they want. They just didn't want to bother doing it for voting rights because minority voters were just not as important as the stock market. That's a fact. If you don't like that fact, you got to take it up with Congress. They're playing good cop, bad cop with you, and they all work for the same exact corrupt donors.